My pen taps the paper, then my brain's blank. What's up, party people, and welcome back to another episode of NYC Foodways, your weekly food and culture discussion from the cultural capital of the world. My name is John, and this week's episode is dedicated to underground hip-hop legend and graffiti writer Keo, aka MC Lord Scotch, aka Smog, your favorite rapper's favorite artist, your favorite YouTubers as well. Ever feel like you can never find a cab when you need one? You might have to wait for somebody to finish their lunch, but a great place to look for cabs is outside the legendary Pakistan Tea House, located at 176 Church Street in Tribeca, and the subject of today's episode. I first started dining here in the year 2000 as a freshman at nearby Stuyvesant High School. Like all teens, I was hungry and in search of value, and Pakistan Tea House was a frequent destination with their $6 platters of rice, naan, and your choice of entree and vegetable. When I decided to write this episode, I was almost certain the establishment was gone for good, but was pleasantly surprised to find that rumors of Pakistan Tea House's demise were greatly exaggerated, or perhaps only temporarily true, and that this episode would be a devotional, not a requiem. Yay! Another Jewish Stuyvesant grad, slightly older than I and with just a smidge more name recognition, Gary Steingart, also favors the place. He was the subject of a profile about a decade ago and mentions gorging himself on lentils, cauliflower, and goat at the Pakistan Tea House. Respect. Anyone who looks like me and orders the goat without making a big deal about it gets honorary membership into the NYC Foodways Circle of Trust. It's always the right choice. The rest of Steingart's profile is pretty amusing. He talks about food and drink approximately every 15 words. I'm happy to report that the Times has given this place its fair shake over the years, with more than one positive review and a handful of other mentions, which is nice to see from the paper of record. Wait, can you guess what Pakistan Tea House's rating is on Yelp? Let's get back to it. The foodways that link vocation and digestion have always intrigued me, especially those of groups of people who actually work for a living. In the late 19th century, Bay Area fishermen of Italian extraction created the now famous cioppino by combining whatever seafood was left unsold from the day's catch, often shellfish, with onions, garlic, and tomatoes. Legend has it that the so-called Pittsburgh steak was invented in the steel mills, where workers needed something filling but didn't have the time to prepare an elaborate meal. They simply tossed steaks onto the side of a blast furnace, et voila. The Plowman's Lunch, which is actually several foodways wrapped up in one, gets its first mention in an Instagram post from 1393 describing the traditional plowman's meal of bread, cheese, and beer. Though player haters have dubbed it nothing more than a publicity stunt, the 1932 photograph of lunch atop a skyscraper is an NYC foodway in and of itself and absolutely falls into this category. There's even a vocational foodway built around a vocational foodway, the famed Dabawalas, aka Tiffinwalas of Mumbai, who deliver countless meals daily via all manner of transport to hordes of hungry office workers. I think this is so neat. Folks working a job providing food to folks whose desk-bound jobs makes this provision of food essential. LOL, Grubhub. To all you Foodways aficionados out there, please drop a comment below if you know of another job that has a relevant food tied to it. I love this type of stuff. Returning to the Big Apple. For decades, this town was a major manufacturing hub, with countless sites of industry employing hundreds of thousands of blue-collar workers across the 5 boroughs. Canteens, coffee shops, which, as we will explore in a future episode, are not what we think of when we talk about coffee shops in the current year. Cafeterias and inexpensive eateries of all types, shout out to Sloppy Louie, abounded in every neighborhood of the city. Thanks to the effects of late-stage capitalism and the globalized markets and labor that came with it, New York has lost much of the blue-collar industry that once thrived here. Working-class jobs aren't completely extinct, of course. Someone still has to come to my apartment at 6:30 p.m. on a Monday in order to cut holes into my ceiling, but they are vastly reduced, especially on the island of Manhattan. Those that do work for a living are generally transient in their labors. Think of the rotating gangs of construction workers, and these folks will generally flock to the high-value restaurants of whichever neighborhood they happen to be working in. Let's have a moment of silence for La Caridad. And what line of work could be more blue-collar and transient than that of the humble yellow cab? Cabbies have had three awful blows against them in recent years: the rise of ride-sharing apps, the artificial inflation of the value of taxi medallions, and the effects of COVID on New York's taxi-hailing population. Back to back to back, these catastrophes have wreaked havoc on the taxi industry's workers. Driven deep into debt, with no promise of an economic future, cabbies are in such a bad way that many of them have killed themselves. Exceedingly grim. I'm not so out of touch as to liken the literal deaths of people working blue-collar jobs to the extinction of affordable restaurants in Manhattan, but there is something that links the two: our system's incessant grind towards ever-increasing economic production, with those at the top granted the tools to do pretty much whatever, and those at the bottom granted only the ability to sacrifice their time, their bodies, and occasionally their lives at the altar of Moloch. I went down to the Pakistan tea house the other day for the first time in many years. I took a bunch of photos and videos, and I guess I could talk about how, when I first entered, I thought I was in the wrong place, as the layout of the restaurant is completely different than it was back in the day. I could mention that as soon as my brain recognized the divinely rich cooking aromas of Pakistani cuisine, there is a tandoor on site that pumps out both bread and meat. I knew I was in the right place. I could discuss how amazing all the food is. For the first time ever, a New Yorker will state that perhaps things might be better in this regard than they were back when. There certainly are more options, as the new owners expanded the menu to include relatively hard to find in Manhattan dishes like goat kaliji, which is liver, and beef halim, which is awesome. I could mention that some of the prices here, just like the prices at Tasty Dumpling, are cheaper now, adjusted for inflation, than they were 2 decades ago. I might even discuss that the weekend crowd was a diverse bunch, representative of a specific slice of New York. Apart from the cab drivers, diners wore the blue of traffic cops, uniforms of nearby big box chain stores, and more than a couple construction workers wandered in for nourishment. But I'd rather speak from the heart, not the stomach. What the hell, man? What has New York become? How did every level of government fail the thousands of drivers that toil tirelessly to ferry the moneyed classes to and fro? What is more iconic to our fair city than the yellow cab? How f***ed up is it that we venerate the machine but let the man inside die? That we venerate the story of the hardworking immigrant but do nothing to act to protect them when push comes to shove? That entire fields of work and their workers continue to be swallowed up by the demonic behemoth of progress without the powers that be so much as batting an eye? That 35 years, under various different ownership, makes a small food business in Tribeca a modern-day Foodways Methuselah. Yeah, I know, New York City is a city of constant change or something, and I do strive to remain grateful here. After all, this is a devotional to Pakistan Tea House, not a requiem. And recent news reports at the time of this writing do show some hope for the beleaguered industry. But the unequal and iniquitous contemporary crisis of the cabbie begs the question: who does the city really work for? And who works in order for the city to work for the rest of us? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week for another episode of NYC Foodways. Peace.